Let me ask you something that may cut deeper than you expect. What if the reason you feel so unmotivated, so tired of chasing goals, so uninterested in things that once excited you, isn't laziness at all? What if it's because you've finally faced a truth about yourself that nobody warned you about? Here's the shocking part. Carl Jung believed that when you confront your shadow, when you drag the hidden parts of your psyche out of the dark, there is a period where life can feel flat, empty, and meaningless. Motivation dissolves. The illusions that once drove you fall away. And you are left standing in silence, staring into yourself. This is the stage almost nobody talks about. People romanticize shadow work as if it's only about empowerment, breakthroughs, and inner light. But here's the part nobody tells you. Facing your shadow can strip you of the very fuel that kept you moving. And until you understand why, you may mistake this emptiness for failure, when in fact it is the doorway to transformation. Think about it. For most of your life, your drive came from hidden wounds. You wanted to succeed so your parents would finally be proud. You wanted to be attractive so you wouldn't feel abandoned. You wanted to prove others wrong, to silence the shame of rejection. All of this fire came from your shadow. Your pain was your engine. But once you turn and face that shadow, you dismantle the engine. Suddenly the urgency is gone. And with it, your motivation. Here's a rehook. But what if I told you that loss of motivation is not the end of your journey, but the beginning of your real life? Let's take an example. Imagine a man who spent his whole life trying to be the top achiever. In school, he worked obsessively to get straight A's. Not because he loved learning, but because deep down, he believed he was worthless unless he excelled. As an adult, he built his career on the same wound, working endless hours to prove he was enough. But then, through therapy and shadow work, he realizes the truth. All his striving was built on shame. That shame was never his fault. It belonged to the voices that told him he was not good enough. And suddenly, he no longer wants to climb the ladder. The ladder itself feels meaningless. That's the collapse of motivation Jung warned about. Wait until you hear this. Jung believed that much of modern society is built on unconscious drives. We don't chase wealth because we truly love money. We chase it because we fear powerlessness. We don't crave recognition because we love connection. We crave it because we fear invisibility. Strip away those fears, face them head on, and the chase loses meaning. That's why, after shadow work, so many people report a strange numbness. It's not depression. It's not failure. It's the void left when illusions crumble. Here's the part nobody talks about. This void is necessary. It is the fertile soil from which authentic desire grows. Because until you face your shadow, every desire you chase belongs to someone else. Your parents, your culture, your wounds. When those die, what's left? Silence. And silence terrifies us. Let's use a metaphor. Imagine you've been running a marathon your whole life. You're sweaty, exhausted, but you keep running because you think the finish line will save you. Then one day someone tells you, there is no finish line. You stop running. You look around. At first you feel lost, pointless. What was the point of all that running? But if you stay still long enough, you begin to see something you missed. The trees, the sky, the beauty of the path itself. This is the stillness that follows shadow work. Here's another rehook. And what if I told you that emptiness you fear is actually the space where your soul starts to speak? Jung described this stage as a kind of death of the old self. He warned that it could feel like despair, a collapse of meaning, even a confrontation with nothingness. But he also believed it was the threshold to individuation, the process of becoming whole, becoming who you truly are. And here's the paradox. True motivation does not return until you pass through this desert. Let me give you another story. A woman grows up always being the caretaker, always pleasing others. Her shadow is the rage she hides, the part of her that longs to say no. Through shadow work, she finally faces that rage. She realizes her entire life has been built on self-betrayal. At first, she feels liberated, but soon after she feels empty. She doesn't want to take care of others anymore, but she also doesn't know what she wants for herself. For weeks, maybe months, she feels aimless. This is the collapse. This is the desert. But slowly, she begins to hear a new voice inside her. It whispers of passions she buried long ago. She begins painting again, writing again, dreaming again, not to please anyone, but to express herself. That is motivation reborn. But on a different foundation, the collapse is the bridge between false motivation and authentic purpose. But here's the danger. Many people don't survive this stage. They panic. They mistake emptiness for failure. They run back to old patterns, chasing validation again, chasing pain-driven goals again, just to avoid silence. That's why Jung called this process dangerous, because not everyone is willing to walk through the dark night of the soul without running away. Here's a final rehook for this opening. So let me ask you, are you brave enough to let your false motivations die so that something truer can be born? Because that's the essence of Jung's warning. Facing your shadow may strip you of everything that once drove you. But if you endure the emptiness, if you allow the silence, you will emerge with a motivation that is no longer borrowed from wounds, but born from wholeness. And that, Jung believed, is the only kind of motivation that can set you free. When you first begin facing your shadow, something strange happens. You expect liberation, but instead you feel drained. The mask you once wore, the polished, socially acceptable version of yourself, falls away, and what's left feels raw, empty, and unmotivated. You might even ask yourself, what's wrong with me? Shouldn't I feel stronger now that I'm facing the truth? And this is where Jung's warning becomes crystal clear. When you meet your shadow, you also meet the death of the illusion that once gave you energy. Think about it. Much of your motivation in life may have been borrowed from illusions, the need to impress others, the drive to meet societal standards, the endless chase for approval or success. These illusions act like gasoline. They may not be healthy fuel, but they keep the car moving. When you strip them away, the car suddenly stops. That's the shock of shadow work. You've removed the old fuel, but you haven't yet found the new one. But here's the part nobody talks about. The shadow doesn't just expose what you've denied. It also dissolves the false structures that were holding you together. When those vanish, you enter a void. Jung referred to this as a necessary descent into the underworld of the psyche. And like any descent, it feels dark, heavy, and hopeless at first. Let me give you a metaphor. Imagine you've been climbing a mountain your whole life. Every step upward was motivated by the thought that once you reach the top, people will admire you, respect you, or finally see your worth. But halfway through shadow work, you realize the mountain isn't real. The peak is an illusion. Suddenly, the climb no longer makes sense. Why waste energy? Why keep pushing? You sit down, exhausted, unmotivated, and lost. That's exactly how shadow integration feels in the beginning. Wait until you hear this. Jung believed that most people avoid shadow work not because it's difficult, but because it robs them of the false stories they've relied on for meaning. Without those stories, the human mind feels like it's standing in quicksand. And that's terrifying. Let's make this personal. Think of someone who worked tirelessly to become successful in their career. Their shadow, however, contained deep insecurity, maybe a fear of worthlessness. By facing that shadow, they suddenly realized that their entire career path was driven not by passion, but by a desperate need to prove themselves. Now imagine the impact of that realization. The promotions, the long hours, the sacrifices, all of it feels hollow. Motivation collapses. Why keep working toward a goal that was never truly theirs? This is Jung's warning. Confronting the shadow strips away borrowed meaning before authentic meaning has had the chance to emerge. And in that in-between space, many feel depressed, unmotivated, and adrift. But here's the paradox. This collapse is not a failure. It's initiation. The unmotivated stage is like a cocoon. It feels empty because your old identity is dissolving. But without that emptiness, the new self can never be born. The problem is, most people panic during this phase. They think something's wrong with them. They try to run back to their old fuel, their old illusions, their old masks. And in doing so, they miss the transformation that was waiting. Now, let's look at the deeper psychological mechanics behind this. Jung said the ego feeds on illusions. It thrives on the stories we tell ourselves about who we are. When those stories collapse, the ego feels starved, and with starvation comes exhaustion. You can't even get out of bed some days. You don't want to chase dreams or socialize or build anything. Why? Because the ego has lost its script. The play is over, and the stage is empty. But here's the secret nobody tells you: this emptiness is actually fertile ground. Think of a field after it's been cleared. At first, it looks barren and wasted. But in reality, it's finally ready for real seeds to be planted. This barren stage is not the end. It's the beginning. Jung warned, however, that not everyone makes it through. Some people cling to their old illusions and never face the shadow again. They go back to the climb, pretending the mountain is real. Others sink into despair and never discover the new fuel waiting for them. The rare few, the ones who endure the unmotivated void, emerge with something extraordinary: authentic energy. Motivation not borrowed from fear, guilt, or approval, but born from the soul. Here's a story to illustrate this. There was once a man who spent his life pleasing everyone around him. He was the perfect employee, the perfect friend, the perfect family member. But when he began shadow work, he realized that all of this perfection was rooted in a deep terror of rejection. He wasn't giving from love, he was giving from fear. Suddenly, he lost all desire to keep playing that role. He felt empty, tired, and detached. For months, he thought he was broken. But eventually, something shifted. He discovered he actually loved writing poetry. He started sharing his words not to be accepted, but because it was his truth. And for the first time, his motivation felt light, effortless, and free. That's what Jung meant. The death of false motivation clears the way for authentic creation. But only if you can survive the emptiness in between dots. So let me ask you, what if your lack of motivation isn't a sign that something's wrong? What if it's the evidence that you're finally stepping out of illusion and into truth? Because here's the next truth that will shock you. The shadow doesn't just drain your old motivation. It tests whether you're willing to sit in silence long enough for the real fire to emerge. And most people run from that silence. When people first encounter the emptiness that follows shadow work, they often panic. They begin asking, "What's happening to me? Why do I feel so numb? Why don't I care about anything anymore?" And in that panic, they search desperately for something familiar to cling to. This is where Jung's warning becomes urgent. Because the most dangerous thing you can do during shadow work is to run back to the very illusions that were destroying you in the first place. But here's the part nobody talks about. Illusions are seductive. They don't vanish quietly. They whisper to you, tempting you to return. For example, if your old fuel was validation, the shadow might expose how deeply you crave approval. Once you see that, you'll feel disgusted with it. But the moment the emptiness sets in, the craving comes back louder than ever. You may catch yourself scrolling through social media, posting things you don't even care about, just to feel that fleeting rush of attention again. Wait until you hear this. The ego doesn't care if the illusion is killing you, as long as it gives you direction. Even toxic fuel feels better than no fuel at all. This is why so many people get stuck in cycles of toxic relationships, dead-end jobs, or people-pleasing patterns. Their shadow reveals the truth, but the void afterward feels unbearable. So they crawl back to the very prisons they just escaped. Let's imagine this in a story. Picture a woman who realizes, through therapy and journaling, that she has been living her whole life trying to make her parents proud. Every career move, every relationship, every success was designed to gain their approval. When she sees this, she breaks down. She feels liberated for a moment, but then comes the crash. Without that goal, she feels hollow. She doesn't know what she actually wants. Days pass, weeks, she loses motivation, stops working, stops caring. In her desperation, she applies for a new high-status job, just to feel the old fire again. And the cycle begins all over. This is why Jung compared shadow work to alchemy. Alchemy isn't just about breaking down substances. It's about transformation through fire, through patience, through waiting. If you break down your illusions but don't allow time for new meaning to emerge, you'll only return to the lead, never reaching the gold. Here's the part most people avoid. Sitting in emptiness requires courage. Real courage? Because emptiness feels like death? And in a way, it is the death of your old self. Think of the myths Jung loved so much. Heroes always descend into the underworld. Orpheus, Persephone, Inanna, they all enter darkness before they can return with wisdom. But in those myths, there's always a temptation to look back, to cling to what was lost. That's the trap. Looking back keeps you chained, but why does emptiness feel so unbearable? Jung would say it's because the ego equates meaning with survival. When you lose meaning, your ego feels like it's dying. It floods you with fear, despair, even physical exhaustion. You wake up with no energy, no will, no desire. This is not laziness. This is the psyche trying to lure you back to familiar territory. Let me ask you this. How many times have you broken free from something toxic, a relationship, a habit, a job, only to feel so lost afterward that you wondered if leaving was even worth it? That's not weakness. That's shadow work. And if you can survive the in-between, you're already doing something most people never achieve. But here's the shocking truth. The more illusions you lived on before, the harder this stage will feel. If your entire life was built on external approval, money, or status, the collapse of those structures will feel like a total apocalypse. Jung warned that for some people, this descent feels like depression so severe they believe they'll never recover. But recovery isn't about going back. It's about moving through. Think of it like this. If your old fuel was junk food, shadow work is like quitting cold turkey. At first, you feel starved, shaky, even sick. Your body screams for sugar and salt. But if you resist the urge to go back, your body eventually learns to crave real nourishment. The same is true psychologically. Your soul is starving at first because it doesn't know how to eat real food yet. It takes time to build that appetite. Now, here's something Jung emphasized. You can't skip this stage. You can't bypass the emptiness by jumping straight into purpose or passion. If you try, you'll only build another illusion. Authentic motivation can't be rushed. It emerges in silence, often slowly, often painfully. But once it comes, it's uncheckable. Let's return to the metaphor of the mountain. Remember how we said shadow work reveals that the peak was an illusion? In this phase, you're sitting on the mountain path, staring at the ground, wondering what the point of anything is. The temptation is to start climbing again, pretending the peak is real. But the true path is not up. It's inward. The mountain was never the destination. The real treasure is in the cave you've been avoiding at the mountain's base, the cave of the shadow. And here's the next truth that will shock you. Losing motivation after shadow work is not a sign you failed. It's proof you're on the right track. Because if you didn't lose motivation, it would mean your illusions were still intact. The emptiness is evidence that the mask has cracked. So what do you do in this stage? You wait, you endure, you listen. You pay attention to what arises in the silence. Maybe it's anger. Maybe it's grief. Maybe it's desires you buried years ago. These fragments are pieces of your authentic self trying to break through. And if you can resist running back to the old story, those fragments eventually come together to form a new whole, but most people never make it. They get stuck in a loop, collapse, panic, return to illusion, collapse again. Jung's warning was clear. If you ignore the shadow, it will woo you from the dark. But if you face it and endure the emptiness, you gain something no illusion can ever provide. Freedom. So let me ask you again, are you willing to sit in the silence? Are you willing to let go of the false fire long enough for the real one to ignite? Because here's the paradox. The only way to find authentic motivation is to first survive without any at all. Have you ever wondered why so many people mistake shadow work for depression? Why, when someone begins to face their inner darkness, they suddenly look like they've lost the will to live. This is where Carl Jung's warning becomes crucial. He observed that people often confuse psychological transformation with pathology. They believe they're broken, when in reality, they're being dismantled so that something deeper can be born. But here's the part nobody talks about: depression and shadow. Work may look the same from the outside, but internally they are very different journeys. Depression is often a collapse of energy without meaning. Shadow work, on the other hand, is a collapse of meaning that can lead to renewed energy. The difference lies in whether you resist the process or allow it to unfold. Let me paint a picture. Imagine two people sitting in the same dark room. Both are exhausted, both feel lost, both are questioning everything. But one is fighting to get out of the darkness as quickly as possible, while the other allows their eyes to adjust, waiting to see what the shadows reveal. The first remains trapped, cycling endlessly. The second eventually discovers a hidden doorway they couldn't see before. That's the subtle but profound difference between depression and transformation. Wait until you hear this. Jung believed that depression is often the psyche's way of forcing us into shadow work. When we refuse to face what we've buried, the unconscious shuts us down. It drains our energy, makes life unbearable, and corners us until we have no choice but to confront what we've avoided. So, in some cases, what we call depression is really the soul demanding attention. This is why so many people get stuck. They go to doctors, therapists, or self-help programs looking for quick fixes, pills, routines, affirmations, distractions. And while some of those tools can provide relief, they don't address the core problem, the unlived life within them. Jung once wrote that neurosis is the suffering of a soul that has not yet discovered its meaning. In other words, when we repress too much of who we really are, the psyche revolts. Let's take an example. A man has lived his entire life being the provider, the strong one, the dependable one. He never allows himself to express weakness, creativity, or playfulness. Then one day he collapses. He can't get out of bed. He feels no joy in his work, no interest in his family, no desire for life. Everyone calls it depression. And maybe clinically it is? But if we listen through Jung's lens, it's something more. It's the shadow of his denied child, his playful self, his vulnerable self-demanding recognition. Here's the shocking truth. What many people treat as a disease is sometimes the beginning of transformation. The disease is simply the psyche saying enough. You can't live this way anymore, but here's where it gets tricky. If someone doesn't know about the shadow, they will interpret the emptiness as permanent. They will believe, this is just who I am now, unbroken forever. And that belief is what makes depression so dangerous. Without a framework like Jung's, the emptiness feels like meaningless suffering rather than purposeful descent. So how do you tell the difference? Jung would say, watch what emerges in the darkness. In pure depression, there is only endless heaviness. In shadow work, however, subtle signs begin to appear. A dream that shocks you, an old memory resurfacing, a sudden burst of anger or grief you didn't know you carried. These are the whispers of the shadow, clues that something wants to be integrated. But here's the part nobody warns you about. These clues don't come all at once. They drip slowly, like water seeping into stone. And if you're impatient, you'll miss them. The ego wants quick answers, quick solutions, quick motivation. But the soul moves in slow rhythms, in silence and waiting. This is why Jung insisted that shadow work requires patience, and why so few people ever truly complete it. Think of it like winter. On the surface, everything looks dead. The trees are bare, the animals are hidden, the air is still. But underneath the soil, life is preparing for spring. Seeds are gestating, roots are strengthening, and the earth is storing energy. To the untrained eye, it looks like lifelessness. But to those who understand nature, it's a sacred stage of becoming. Shadow work is the winter of the soul. Now, here's the part that will shock you. When people resist this winter, they prolong their suffering. They frantically try to force themselves into spring mode, chasing goals, productivity and positivity when their soul is asking them to rest. This creates burnout, despair, and self-hatred. They say things like, why can't I just get motivated? What's wrong with me? When in reality, nothing is wrong. They are simply in winter. Let me ask you this. What if your lack of motivation is not a failure, but an initiation? What if the emptiness you feel is not proof of your weakness, but evidence that your soul refuses to live on illusions anymore? Think back to the myth of Persephone. She was taken into the underworld, and for months the earth was barren. That barrenness terrified the world above, but it was necessary. Without her descent, there could be no return of fertility, no renewal of life. The myth is a mirror. The descent always looks like death, but it is preparing rebirth. But here's the paradox. You can't skip the death to get to the rebirth. If you try, you end up stuck in a false spring, a forced positivity that cracks the moment life gets hard again. This is why Jung said integration must be lived, not bypassed. So, what do you do during this stage? You stop fighting the darkness. You stop demanding that it move on your timeline. Instead, you become curious. You pay attention to your dreams. You notice the emotions that surface unexpectedly. You ask yourself, what part of me have I silenced for too long? What is my soul asking me to face? And here's the most important part. You remind yourself that this emptiness is not permanent. It feels endless, but it isn't. It is a passage, not a prison. Jung believed that those who endure this descent emerge with a depth of authenticity and resilience that cannot be shaken by life's storms. So let me ask you again, are you willing to sit with the emptiness? Not as a curse, but as a teacher? Are you willing to see your lack of motivation, not as a flaw, but as a signal that the old story is dying? Because if you are, you'll discover something extraordinary. The very thing you thought was destroying you is actually the doorway to your liberation. Let's go deeper. Have you noticed that once you start shadow work, the things that once excited you suddenly feel meaningless? That career path you thought was everything. The relationships you bent over backwards to maintain. The achievements you once believed would finally make you enough, they all lose their shine. And you ask yourself, why don't I care anymore? Here's the shocking truth Jung pointed to. When you face your shadow, you don't just lose motivation, you lose desire itself. Or, more accurately, you lose the false desires that were never truly yours. Think about it. Much of human desire is conditioned. From childhood, we are told what to want: approval, success, status, wealth, security. We build our lives chasing after things that culture, family, or peers told us mattered. But here's the part nobody talks about. The shadow holds all the desires you weren't allowed to have. The selfish desires, the wild desires, the taboo desires, the vulnerable desires. And when you finally meet that shadow, it whispers, what if the life you built wasn't actually yours? That whisper is devastating, because once you hear it, the illusion shatters. You can't unhear it. Suddenly, the promotion you wanted feels empty. The relationship you maintained feels false. The goals you pursued feel like someone else's dream. And with that realization comes the great collapse of desire. But wait until you hear this. Jung believed this collapse is the most necessary stage of individuation. Without it, you'll live forever chasing borrowed dreams. The ego wants easy answers, so it clings desperately to old desires. But the soul says, let it all die first. Only then can you know what is truly yours. Let me give you an example. A woman spends her whole life being the good daughter. She becomes a lawyer, marries the right man, buys the perfect house. Everything society told her would make her happy. But when she begins shadow work, she realizes that beneath her mask is a suppressed artist. She always loved painting, but was told it was impractical. Now every time she goes to work, she feels sick. She can't find motivation. She doesn't care about her career anymore. Why? Because she's finally facing the truth. Her desires were never hers. This stage is brutal, because it feels like losing your identity. Without your old desires, who are you? Without your old motivation, how do you move forward? Many people panic here. They try to force themselves to love their old lives again. They numb themselves with distractions, routines, even addictions, anything to avoid the void. But here's the paradox. The void is not your enemy. It's the compost of your old life, the fertile ground for your true desires to grow. Think of it like a forest fire. When the fire burns through, it destroys everything in sight. The ground looks barren, lifeless, hopeless, but within months, new life begins to sprout, fresher, stronger, more resilient than before. Shadow work is that fire. It burns away the false desires, leaving only the soil where real ones can finally take root. Here's the part nobody tells you. Your true desires are quieter than your false ones. False desires scream. They are loud, urgent, demanding. Get this, achieve that, prove yourself here. True desires, however, whisper. They emerge slowly, gently, almost imperceptibly. And you can only hear them when the noise of false desire has gone silent. That's why the collapse of motivation is not a punishment, but a doorway. But here's the catch, you can't force this stage. You can't sit down and demand, okay, shadow, tell me my real desires right now. It doesn't work like that. The psyche doesn't operate on deadlines. Jung said the unconscious reveals itself in its own time, through dreams, synchronicities, subtle intuitions. That's why patience is the hardest but most essential part of shadow work. Let me ask you this. Have you noticed how children know what they love without being told? Give a child crayons, and if they're an artist, they'll draw for hours without anyone asking. Put another child near music, and they'll start humming or tapping rhythms instinctively. Children are still connected to their inner desires, untainted by the weight of social conditioning. Shadow work is about returning to that place, the raw authenticity you once had, before you were told what to want. But here's the part that will shock you. Most adults are terrified of their true desires. Why? Because true desires rarely fit neatly into social expectations. Maybe your true desire is to live quietly in nature, but you were raised to chase wealth. Maybe your true desire is to create art, but you were told it's impractical. Maybe your true desire is to speak truth, but your family demanded silence. Facing your shadow often reveals that the life you've built is incompatible with the life you actually want, and that's why motivation dies. Because once you see the truth, you can't force yourself to care about illusions anymore. So let me reframe this for you. Your lack of motivation is not laziness. It's honesty. It's your soul saying, I can't pretend anymore. Here's a story that captures this. A man spent years climbing the corporate ladder. He had money, recognition, respect, but every night he dreamed of the sea. He dreamed of boats, of freedom, of water stretching endlessly. During shadow work, he realized that his soul longed to be a sailor, to explore, to live simply. Suddenly, the office felt like a prison. His motivation to work collapsed. Everyone thought he was depressed. But he wasn't depressed. He was awakening. Jung warned that this stage is dangerous because society doesn't understand it. Society wants you productive, motivated, useful to its machinery. When you lose motivation for its illusions, it will label you broken. But you're not broken. You're being reborn. So let me ask you, what if the emptiness you feel isn't emptiness at all, but spaciousness? What if it's the space being cleared so your true desires can finally breathe? Here's the truth that will shock you. If you endure this stage, if you refuse to run back to false desires, something extraordinary happens. Slowly, quietly, new desires begin to emerge. They don't come with the pressure of proving yourself. They come with a sense of peace, of alignment, of rightness. You no longer chase them to feel worthy. You pursue them because they are you. And when you act from that place, motivation is no longer something you have to force. It flows naturally, effortlessly, like a river finding its course. So far, we've uncovered why shadow work feels like the death of motivation, the collapse of illusions, the loss of false desires, the disorienting emptiness that follows. But here's where Jung's warning cuts deeper. The very freedom you gain through facing your shadow is not the freedom you expect. It's not comfortable. It's not convenient. It's not the kind of freedom that makes life easy. It's the kind of freedom that terrifies the ego, because it means you can no longer lie to yourself. Here's the part nobody talks about. Most people think they want freedom, but what they actually want is comfort. They want the freedom to choose, but within boundaries that feel safe. They want freedom as long as it doesn't disrupt their identity, their relationships, or their social role. True freedom, the kind shadow work gives you, dismantles all of that. Wait until you hear this. Jung said that freedom is born the moment the shadow is integrated, because you are no longer unconsciously controlled by the parts of yourself you've denied. But that also means you can no longer use ignorance as an excuse. You can't hide behind masks. You can't pretend you don't know what you really want. That level of honesty is liberating, but it's also heavy. Imagine carrying a cage around your whole life. It's uncomfortable, but at least you know its boundaries. You decorate it, make it bearable, maybe even call it home. Shadow work doesn't just open the door to that cage, it shatters it completely. And suddenly you're standing in an open field with no walls, no restrictions, and no familiar boundaries. Sounds beautiful, right? But here's the paradox. Most people panic in that field. They miss the cage. They long for the comfort of structure, even if it meant limitation. This next truth will shock you. That's why so many people sabotage their own healing. Freedom feels too vast, too uncertain, too terrifying. They unconsciously run back to the very cages they once begged to escape. They return to toxic jobs, toxic relationships, or self-destructive habits, not because they want pain, but because pain feels familiar. Let me give you a story. A woman spent years in a controlling relationship. She finally broke free, did the shadow work, and realized she had been conditioned to suppress her needs for others. For a while, she felt liberated. But then, an unexpected emptiness settled in. She no longer knew who she was without someone telling her what to do. She felt overwhelmed by the vastness of her own freedom. And so, without realizing it, she drifted back into another controlling relationship. This is the paradox of freedom. It demands responsibility. It demands that you choose for yourself. And many find that terrifying. Here's where Jung's wisdom becomes invaluable. He said, people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. Why? Because facing your soul means facing freedom. And freedom means you can no longer outsource your meaning to someone else. But here's the part nobody talks about. Freedom is exhausting at first. When you break the chains of old illusions, you don't automatically feel light. You feel heavy. Why? Because suddenly every choice is yours. You can no longer blame your parents, society, or circumstances for dictating your path. The responsibility is yours alone. That responsibility can feel like a burden before it feels like a gift. Think about it. In the old life, you might have chased success because your family demanded it. If you failed, you could blame them. In the new life, you chase only what your soul wants. If you fail, there's no one left to blame. It's on you. That weight is terrifying, but it's also the birthplace of true maturity. Now let's make this personal. Have you ever reached a point where the things that once drove you no longer mattered, but the new things that called you forward hadn't fully revealed themselves yet? That's the no man's land of freedom. You've left a cage, but you haven't yet built a home in the open field. This is why so many people feel lost after shadow work. It's not because they're failing. It's because they're in transition. Here's the part that will shock you. Jung said individuation, the process of becoming your true self, often begins with this exact stage of emptiness and fear. It's the desert before the oasis, the night before the dawn. Without it, you can never step into your full power. But let's be brutally honest. Freedom isn't always glamorous. It means saying no to people who once controlled you. It means walking away from jobs, friendships, or entire lifestyles that no longer align. It means loneliness at times, because not everyone can follow you where you're going. And it means being misunderstood because society thrives on conformity, not individuality. So let me ask you, are you willing to be misunderstood in order to be free? Are you willing to lose comfort in order to gain authenticity? Because here's the secret. When you stop running back to the cage, when you endure the discomfort of wide-open freedom, something remarkable happens. Slowly, you begin to feel a new kind of motivation rising. Not the frantic energy of proving yourself, not the desperate chase of borrowed desires, but a grounded, steady fire, the motivation of alignment. The motivation that comes from living as who you truly are. Think of it like a tree. A tree doesn't grow out of fear or obligation. It doesn't stretch its branches because society told it to. It grows because that is its nature. It grows from alignment with its roots, its environment, its essence. That's what happens when shadow work matures. You no longer push yourself with force. You allow yourself to grow with flow. Here's the paradox. Jung wanted us to understand, you lose motivation at first because you've been cut off from your false desires. You feel empty because freedom feels terrifying. But if you trust the process, that very emptiness becomes fertile. And from it, new, authentic desires emerge, desires that don't drain you, but sustain you. So the real question isn't, why do I have no motivation? The real question is, am I willing to endure the discomfort of freedom long enough to discover what truly motivates me? Because the shadow will not give you comfort. It will give you truth. And truth, though heavy at first, is the only weight worth carrying.